To truly understand why the Dogtrot layout is a masterpiece of minimalist architecture, we must first change how we think about space itself. In Western design, we tend to define value by the presence of things, by the square footage of heated, dry-walled rooms. But true minimalism, particularly when you look at traditional Japanese or classic vernacular architecture, defines value by the absence of things. It is about the power of the void, and the Dogtrot house is fundamentally built around a magnificent, productive void. For those unfamiliar with the anatomy of a Dogtrot, the concept is beautifully basic. It consists of two separate, self-contained living pavilions sitting side by side, connected by a wide, open-air central breezeway, and covered completely by a single, continuous, unified roofline. Historically, early 19th century settlers built them out of hand-hewn log timbers to handle the brutal, humid heat of the American South, from the Carolinas down through Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and out into the piney woods of East Texas. One side was the hot, active kitchen, often built slightly detached or with a stone chimney to keep fire risk away from the sleeping quarters. The other side was the quiet bedroom, sometimes a loft above for children. The gap in the middle, the trot, was where the family actually lived, worked, shelled peas, mended tools, and stayed cool during the long, suffocating summer months before electricity ever touched rural America. It is worth pausing on that fact alone. Long before air conditioning existed, generations of families survived oppressive heat using nothing but geometry, orientation, and airflow. That is the entire premise we are returning to today, except now we are applying it with modern materials, modern insulation science, and a modern minimalist mindset. In a Dogtrot, the central breezeway acts as an unconditioned, open-air living room that costs absolutely nothing to heat or cool, uses zero drywall, and requires no internal structural framing beyond what is already holding up the roof. It is a space that doesn't count towards your official home size on paper, yet it provides a massive, multifunctional area for dining, relaxing, working, and gathering. The void becomes the most important room in the house. It allows you to live small while experiencing space grandly. This is the central paradox of the Dogtrot, and, frankly, the central paradox of good minimalist design in general. Less enclosed square footage does not mean less lived experience. In many cases, it means more, because every square foot you do build is doing real intentional work, rather than sitting half-used as a hallway nobody remembers walking through. Let's dive deeper into the psychological reality of small footprint living. The primary reason people eventually abandon tiny homes or micropods after the initial honeymoon phase wears off is a phenomenon often described as visual fatigue. When your eyes are constantly hitting a wall just a few feet away from your face, day after day, your brain instinctively registers a low-grade state of confinement, even if you consciously chose that lifestyle. Your stress hormones creep upward, your sense of agency shrinks, and the home slowly ceases to feel like a sanctuary and starts to feel like a box you are waiting to escape from. This is the silent failure mode of so many beautifully photographed tiny homes you see online. They look stunning in a single wide-angle shot, but the lived reality of staring at the same 18 feet of wall for 6 straight months tells a very different story. The Dogtrot solves this problem entirely through what we might call visual expansion, because the inner walls facing the breezeway are typically designed with massive glass doors, sliding barn-style panels, or oversized windows, and the sightlines of the home are pushed completely outward instead of inward. When you are sitting inside the living cabin, your eyes don't stop at the edge of the room. They travel across the open timber deck, through the shaded breezeway, past the porch railing, and out to the tree line or the horizon beyond. You can have a kitchen that is incredibly compact, designed with the strict, almost nautical efficiency of a luxury sailboat galley. But because it opens up directly onto the expansive central corridor and the landscape past it, it never once feels small. You get all the financial and environmental benefits of a sub-1,000 square foot home, but you get the emotional and psychological experience of living in an open, sprawling villa. It is a masterclass in architectural optics, proof that you don't need a massive amount of enclosed physical space to achieve a massive sense of freedom. The eye, it turns out, is far easier to satisfy than the floor plan. One of the core tenets of minimalism is intentionality, the idea that every object, every room, and every action should have its own dedicated place, free from overlap and noise. However, modern open-concept home designs, the kind dominating new-build suburbia, do the exact opposite. They throw the kitchen, the living room, the home office, and the media center all into one giant reverberating space with 12-foot ceilings and zero acoustic separation. The result is a constant, chaotic overlap of sensory data that your brain has to filter through all day long. You are trying to read a book while someone else is loudly washing dishes 6 feet behind you. You are trying to fall asleep while the smell of last night's dinner still lingers heavy in the air because there was never a door to close between the kitchen and the bed. The Dogtrot structure introduces what might be the ultimate minimalist luxury: absolute structural separation. By splitting the home into 2 distinct, freestanding pavilions, you create a profound psychological boundary that no amount of clever open-concept furniture arranging can replicate. One cabin becomes the active zone, housing the kitchen, the dining nook, and the social living area, the place where mess and noise and life happen freely without guilt. The other cabin across the breezeway becomes the quiet sanctuary, reserved exclusively for sleeping, bathing, reading, or deep meditation. This physical separation fundamentally changes how you experience your own day. When you step out of the active cabin at night, cross the moonlit deck of the breezeway, feel the temperature shift on your skin, and enter the bedroom cabin, your brain undergoes an almost instant ritual shift, similar to the effect of a commute, except this commute is 15 feet long and entirely under roof. The smells of cooking, the visual clutter of dirty dishes, the residual noise of the television, they are physically left behind in an entirely different building. The bedroom remains pure, undisturbed, and entirely dedicated to rest. This level of acoustic and psychological privacy is virtually impossible to achieve in a standard small home or studio apartment, making the Dogtrot a far superior blueprint for genuine mental well-being, not just a prettier floor plan. Minimalism isn't just an interior design aesthetic built around beige linen and empty countertops. At its core, it is a commitment to reducing our consumption of the Earth's finite resources. And a home cannot be truly minimalist if, in order to remain livable, it requires a massive, complex network of mechanical equipment and an enormous, ongoing draw of electricity just to keep the indoor air breathable. This is where the historical, field-tested engineering of the Dogtrot becomes incredibly relevant to our modern ecological challenges, almost 2 centuries after it was first built out of pure necessity rather than ideology. As we verified in our previous explorations of this style, the central breezeway operates as a highly efficient, passive aerodynamic engine, something engineers today would call a wind funnel or Venturi corridor. By utilizing the Venturi effect, the narrowed corridor between the 2 cabins funnels ambient air, increasing its velocity and dropping its pressure as it accelerates through the gap. This creates a natural, continuous vacuum that draws warm, stagnant air out from the interiors of both flanking cabins, provided their windows are cracked open toward the trot to feed the draft. Combined with the stack effect, where hot air naturally rises and escapes through high vents or gable openings, while cooler air is pulled in low, you get a self-regulating thermal cycle that runs 24 hours a day with 0 moving parts, 0 electricity, and 0 maintenance cost beyond keeping the windows clear. In a world facing increasingly erratic summer temperatures, record-breaking heat domes, and rising grid costs, the Dogtrot offers a way to achieve genuine thermal comfort through pure geometry, rather than brute mechanical force. By orienting the breezeway to align with prevailing local summer winds, something a good architect or even a careful homeowner can map out using simple windrows data for their region, you can completely eliminate the need for air conditioning during all but the most extreme heat waves of the year. Furthermore, because the roofline is continuous and unbroken over the open corridor, both cabins are permanently shaded and protected from harsh direct midday sun, drastically reducing thermal gain through the walls and windows before it ever becomes a problem you need to solve mechanically. It is a design that achieves maximum comfort through minimal intervention, which is, when you strip away all the marketing language, the very definition of sustainable minimalism. Let's talk for a moment about the physical reality of actually building a house, because this is where so many beautiful design concepts quietly fall apart once they meet a contractor's quote. The vast majority of modern home construction is incredibly wasteful by default. Complex roof designs with multiple valleys and dormers, irregular floor plans with bump outs and angled walls, and custom corner framing all create tons of scrap lumber, drywall offcuts, and shingle waste that goes straight into a dumpster and then straight into a landfill. For a true minimalist, this hidden environmental cost, the cost that never shows up on the invoice but absolutely shows up on the planet, is deeply troubling. The Dogtrot layout fights this waste through its inherent mathematical simplicity. Because a Dogtrot is composed of two basic rectangular boxes, covered by a single standard gabled roof, it represents the absolute peak of structural efficiency in residential framing. Rectangles are the easiest shapes to frame, full stop. They require the fewest custom cuts. They align almost perfectly with standard 8, 10, and 12-foot lumber dimensions straight off the rack, and they minimize the kind of complicated roof intersections that eat both money and material. This means that when you build a Dogtrot, material waste is virtually non-existent compared to a conventional custom home, and your framing crew can move through the build dramatically faster, which saves you even more on labor costs. Furthermore, the foundations can be kept incredibly minimal and low impact. Instead of pouring a massive, expensive, carbon-heavy concrete slab across the entire footprint of the home, a modern Dogtrot can be easily elevated on simple concrete piers, helical screw piles, or even pressure-treated post foundations in the right soil conditions. This leaves the natural terrain beneath the house almost completely undisturbed, preserves root systems and natural drainage, allows for easy crawl space access to plumbing and electrical runs for future repairs, and drastically reduces both upfront construction costs and the home's total embodied carbon footprint. The structure doesn't impose itself on the landscape the way a bulldozed, slab-on-grade subdivision lot does. It treads lightly, using only what is absolutely structurally necessary to create a secure, permanent, decades-spanning shelter. The modern minimalist movement is also deeply intertwined with the desire for lifestyle design and career freedom. More people than ever before are working remotely, running digital businesses, freelancing, or engaging in creative consulting from somewhere inside their own home. But trying to maintain a minimalist mindset when your laptop is sitting on your kitchen counter next to a dirty coffee mug, or your video call background is awkwardly blocking your view of your own unmade bed, is an uphill battle that quietly chips away at your focus all day long. It creates a state of perpetual mental clutter where work, rest, and domestic life are all visually and psychologically tangled into one undifferentiated blob. The Dogtrot layout handles the remote work reality better than almost any other residential design in history, and it did so by accident, decades before remote work even existed as a concept. In a minimalist Dogtrot setup, you don't need a massive house with a dedicated office room buried deep within a labyrinth of hallways and closed doors. You simply designate one of the two cabins as your professional domain, full stop. One side of the trot is your domestic life. The other side is your professional life. This layout creates a beautifully literal microcommute. When you wake up, you enjoy your morning routine in the living cabin. Coffee, breakfast, maybe a few minutes outside on the deck. When it is time to work, You physically step outside into fresh air, take 10 or 15 steps across the covered breezeway, and enter your workspace as a deliberate, embodied transition, rather than just opening a laptop on the same couch you slept near. You are physically and mentally separating your labor from your rest, which is something open-plan apartments and home offices crammed into a spare bedroom almost never achieve. If clients or collaborators need to visit your office, they can walk straight into your workspace from the central breezeway, without ever stepping foot inside your private kitchen or living areas. It protects the sanctity of your personal life, while still providing a highly professional, entirely undistracted environment for serious, focused work. Now let's talk about the ultimate goal of minimalism, the part that rarely gets talked about in pretty interior photos. It isn't just about having an aesthetically pleasing, uncluttered shelf or a perfectly curated capsule wardrobe. It is, at its foundation, about achieving genuine financial freedom. Minimalism is the tool we use to strip away unnecessary expenses so that we can reclaim our time, buy back our independence, and live without the crushing weight of a massive 30-year mortgage hanging over every decision we make. Yet, the traditional home buying process forces almost everyone into a state of immediate, total, long-term financial debt the moment they sign the closing documents, regardless of whether they actually need that much house on day one. The Dogtrot layout breaks this cycle through the brilliant concept of phased modular construction. Because the home is structurally divided into two genuinely independent halves connected by a shared roof, you do not have to build the entire house at the same time, and you do not have to take out the entire loan at once either. For a young designer, a solo remote worker, or a couple just starting out, you can focus all of your initial capital on building Cabin A first. This first cabin contains your kitchen, a compact bathroom, and a flexible combined living and sleeping space. You build it debt-free, or with a very small, manageable loan that doesn't dictate the next 3 decades of your life. At the same time, you build the continuous roof structure and the shared concrete pier or screw pile foundation system across the full footprint, leaving the space for Cabin B simply as an open, covered deck for now. For the first few years, you live comfortably and minimally in your single cabin, using the covered deck as a massive outdoor patio, workshop, or dining space, essentially getting bonus square footage for free while you save. Then, as your family grows, your business expands, or your savings pool finally increases enough, you simply frame in the second cabin beneath the roof structure that has been patiently waiting there the whole time. You never have to go through the chaotic, expensive nightmare of a traditional home extension. Tearing into existing walls, matching old roofing material, fighting with permits for an addition, because the architectural infrastructure was already built correctly the first time. The Dogtrot allows your home to grow organically, in step, at the exact same pace as your actual financial reality, rather than forcing your financial reality to stretch and strain to match a house that was always bigger than you needed on day one. It's also worth addressing the honest limitations of this style, because no design is a perfect fit for every climate or every lifestyle, and pretending otherwise does a disservice to anyone actually considering building one. In genuinely cold climates, an open-air breezeway clearly cannot function as usable living space for several months of the year, and crossing it in heavy rain, snow, or sub-zero wind to get from the kitchen to the bedroom is a real and valid concern. The historical solution, and the one many modern architects are quietly reviving, is to enclose the breezeway with sliding glass doors or removable storm panels that can be opened wide in summer and sealed up tight in winter, essentially converting the Dogtrot into a 4-season sunroom corridor rather than a true open-air gap. You lose a small amount of the passive cooling efficiency in exchange for year-round usability, which for most modern builders in mixed or northern climates is a more than fair trade. Privacy is another fair consideration if you have close neighbors, since the breezeway openings face both directions. Though strategic fencing, landscaping, or simply orienting the home toward your own property line solves this in almost every real-world case. It's also worth noting that the Dogtrot template has aged remarkably well into the era of modern prefab and kit construction. Today, you'll see the same two-pavilion, central corridor logic applied not just in hand-built timber frame versions, but in steel frame barndominiums, in Quonset hut hybrid builds with curved corrugated roofing, and in fully prefabricated modular kits that can be trucked to a remote site and assembled in a matter of weeks rather than months. The core principle, two efficient boxes, one connecting void, one unified roof, survived the material change completely intact, which is honestly the strongest possible proof that this isn't a stylistic trend from a particular decade. It's a structural and psychological solution to the universal problem of living well in a small footprint. One that just happens to look as striking in raw black corrugated steel and floor-to-ceiling glass today as it did in hand-hewn cypress logs 200 years ago. Let's ground all of this in real numbers for a moment, because minimalist philosophy is only convincing once it survives contact with an actual